are going to have to be very concise and precise in their answers. We've given them the questions in advance and asked them to think about how to respond with pithy, informative answers about the legislative issues and ideas that we want to address today. So the notion is that the panels will address a whole bunch of ideas, give us some information to start conversations, and then all of us who are here today will choose a discussion table. There'll be 2 opportunities for discussion tables, so you can actually choose 2 topics at different points in the day. Each of the tables that surrounds you has a topic on it, a little placard that tells you what topic you will be discussing if you choose to sit at that table, and you can follow your favorite panelists to whichever table they end up sitting at if you would really like to ask a question to one of the people on the panels. So with that said, I cannot tell you what it means to me that you all came here today to participate in this forum. It is a beautiful thing to see so many people concerned about the lives of people in prison in Michigan, and I'm honored that we're going to have such a rich and full day of talking about the things that matter to us most, precisely how the arts can influence these conversations about criminal justice. And with that, I will turn it over to Sarah Triplett, who will help us get the first panel underway.
All right, thank you so much. But yes, again, my name is Sarah Gonzalez Triplett. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Advocacy for Creative Many Michigan, and I will be serving as your tour guide this morning. For those of you who are not as familiar with Creative Many, we are headquartered in Detroit, but we have offices in Lansing, in Grand Rapids, and in Kalamazoo. We are a statewide organization with a mission to develop creative people, creative places, and a creative economy for a competitive, vibrant, and resilient Michigan. And that's done in a couple of ways with my brilliant colleagues who are here today, all of whom are here today. That is through our research, our advocacy and public policy, our professional practice programs, our strategic communications, and our own funding and investments. And I am thrilled to be here with all of these amazing people, with all of you today, to highlight some issues around criminal justice. And I'm absolutely floored to be here with an esteemed panel. Each of the individuals before you are leading important bodies of work, and we are very lucky to get to spend some time with them, learning from them this morning. And so first, to kick things off, I was wondering if each of the panelists would be willing to introduce themselves and maybe to share about your connection to criminal justice issues. And I'll start right here with Joe.
Good morning. Great to be here today. My name is Joe Haveman. I currently serve as Director of Government Relations for Hope Network. We are a nonprofit group out of Grand Rapids, but we're statewide, that deal with people with disabilities. One of the things we do is also handle reentry issues. So I served 6 years in the legislature and gravitated around this issue. And when I started with Hope Network, I was able to continue to work on my passion. So we train people, we try to find them jobs, we help them with their soft skills. And I'm also running for the Senate, so I hope to go back and continue to work on this issue.
To be pithy, I wrote mine out. Otherwise, I get distracted. I'm Curt Tofteland. I'm the founder of Shakespeare Behind Bars. I've worked as a prison arts practitioner for 23 years. I founded the SBB program in Kentucky in 1995. In 2008, I moved to Holland and founded SBB program in the Muskegon Heights, where at the peak of programming, I facilitated 5 SBB circles in the E.C. Brooks Correctional Facility and 3 SBB circles in the West Shoreline Correctional Facility, working with a total of over 200 prisoners each week. The mission of Shakespeare Behind Bars is to offer theatrical encounters with personal and social issues to the incarcerated, allowing them to develop the skills, the life skills, that will ensure their successful reintegration into society. Using the power of art, theater, the works of William Shakespeare, and original writing, Shakespeare Behind Bars offers participants the ability to hope and the courage to act despite their fear and the odds against them. Participants are immersed in the healing power of a restorative circle of reconciliation, transforming them from who they were when they committed their crimes to who they are in the present moment, to who they wish to become. Shakespeare Behind Bars has created developmentally appropriate programming for incarcerated adult male and female offenders, as well as for court-involved co-gender youth in juvenile justice settings.
Hi, my name is Hazelette Crosby-Robinson, and I am the current Vice President of the Michigan Council on Crime and Delinquency. And I'm also a member of Nation Outside. And what we do a lot of legislative and policy work. We've met with the Michigan State Judiciary Committee. We partnered with Michigan Voices. We created and distributed a voting rights flyer along with ACLU's Let Me Vote to 7 parole officers and a lot more wonderful things. I'm also a formerly incarcerated person, and I'm a graduate of the University of Michigan.
Wonderful. Good morning. My name is Alma Robinson. I'm the Director of California Lawyers for the Arts. I started with the organization in 1980 as the founding director of our Arts Arbitration and Mediation Services program, which helps artists resolve disputes without litigation, without acrimony. And that became a true line for me in the work with our organization. Fast forward to 2011, we began an Arts and Corrections initiative, which was designed to help restore funding for arts programs in prisons and jails in California. We had previously had a very stellar program. We were working with the William James Association, which you should look up sometime. They've been doing this work for 40 years. And due to funding cutbacks to our State Arts Council in 2003, when the state budget went from $33 million to $1 million from the state general fund, the $1 million was only maintained because the NEA said, if you don't give some money, we're going to take our money. So that was some leverage. So for 10 years, we had labored to try to restore funding for California arts. And in 2011, as I mentioned, we started this Arts and Corrections initiative. We did an evaluation project with the William James Association, evaluating the benefits of arts programs in 4 state prisons and 2 county jails. The results were presented to the legislature, the Department of Corrections, and the State Arts Council, and they instituted a $2.5 million pilot project in up to 19 state prisons. Mind you, our state corrections system was under a lot of pressure at that point for overcrowding under federal supervision, and they started to look at the ARA in the name of the agency, which was California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. So in exercising the rehabilitation part of their name, they decided they should spend some money on rehabilitative programs, which included the arts. That program has since grown to $8 million a year for programs in all state prisons. And the bonus is that the State Arts Council budget was also leveraged as a result of that work, and it's now $26 million for arts programs in California. So I thank the people who participated in our Arts and Corrections evaluation, the organizations, and the legislators as well, who saw the light and decided that rehabilitation was a better solution than endless punishment. Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Cooper. I'm the policy director at CAPS. That's the Citizens Alliance on Prisons and Public Spending. We're actually changing our name soon to Safe and Just Michigan, and you should look for a new website from us soon. I'm a lawyer. I grew up in Grand Rapids, but spent about a decade in DC working criminal defense there, and came back to Michigan because I saw criminal justice reform really as something that needs to happen in the states primarily. Most prisoners are held on the state level, and state politics function very differently than federal politics. So came back to Michigan. I had the really good fortune to connect with David LeGrand, who's a state rep from my hometown, Grand Rapids, who is extremely passionate and knowledgeable about criminal justice issues, and really showed me what's happening in Michigan and got me plugged in with CAPS. So I'm a lobbyist in Lansing for criminal justice reform. I'm there when the legislature's in session, and we also do policy research around length of stay, but also intake and reentry. Thanks.
All right, we're gonna do some refiguring. Can you hear from here? Should we take a? We might have to take these off. All right, if everybody wants to take their mic out, so we'll do a little planning. All right. All right, thank you everybody for that. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up is that I think that there are some people in this room that are very new into this conversation. This may be the first time that they're talking about, criminal justice. And so as we kind of go along here, I think that just a friendly reminder that, making sure that we're spelling out all the different words and not going by abbreviations, or that if we're talking about a specific item, if you'd be willing to kind of define what that issue means to you. And my example is our next question. As we talk about restorative justice efforts that you see taking place in Michigan right now, how can we strengthen or expand these efforts? And if you could share, what does restorative justice mean to you? And we can go if we want to start at the opposite end of the table.
Yeah, sure. I think that's a great question because restorative justice is not on. No. Got it. Check. So restorative justice is a term you'll hear a lot when you talk about criminal justice reform. It's not often, I think, defined in a helpful way. The criminal justice system as we know it is very punitive, and the idea of restoration, it runs throughout the ideas of rehabilitation and restitution and that sort of thing, but I think it's more helpfully talked about as a very specific process where the victim and the offender engage in a mediated dialogue to try and remedy the harm that was caused. This is a very community-based concept. It goes back to tribal justice systems, and the formalization of criminal justice into the state prosecuting a harm to prove guilt and take someone out of the community as punishment is like, it's a somewhat new and modern concept, and I think it does not give either victims or offenders what they need to heal. And until we have a conversation about that, and as a society, we're not going to end this punitive system that we have or make communities as safe as they should be.
I mentioned earlier that I had been involved in mediation and alternative dispute resolution for a number of years. So when I was doing my in-service, let's call it, at San Francisco Women's Jail, I was part of a group that was singing, and we were singing Negro spirituals with a choir leader. I was there to do some communications and dispute resolution practice drills at the beginning of every singing session. And we would talk about, anger management, how to resolve problems. So I asked the women at one point to sing out, forgive me, Hazelette, you're a real singer, but I've sung in choirs. And so we did a little exercise where you sing out any note as loud as you can. So I'm going to ask you guys to do that. Just sing a note loudly. Okay, now we're going to do harmony. We're going to see what that feels like instead. Okay. Da, 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 da. What was that like? Was it different? Did it feel better? Relaxing? So I asked the women, I said, okay, after we talked about harmony versus cacophony and anger and, what does that all feel like? What's that represent inside? What does it feel like inside your body? And so I said, okay, take that sense of harmony out into the rest of the facility and come back in a week or two, and our next session we'll talk about what happened. So one woman said, well, we had a birthday party for some of us in this group, and we made the cake and this. Another woman said, well, I thought about something I had said to one of the people on staff. And she said, and I said to myself, I'm a bigger woman than that. And I apologized to her. And I said, wow, that's incredible. Well, the staff had a meeting, and they reported to our program coordinator, who's in the room with us at every session. And they said, whatever you all are doing in that singing group, keep doing it. So that's my story about restorative justice. It could be in small ways that make a meaningful difference in people's lives and in their everyday behavior, as opposed to just thinking about the big victor and offender incident. But it's also how we carry ourselves forward in our lives, and who are we wherever we are.
What a wonderful segue. I think you have a great voice. Singing, I can remember when I was incarcerated singing on the count. And I remember that music made a real big difference, because what I couldn't say, I could sing, and I could, act out. And I remember singing several songs. That really helped me a lot. It calmed me, it centered me, it made me think about outside of what was going on in my surroundings. And so as a result, I'm a singer and a songwriter and a playwright, because I found that musical expression and artistic expression is a wonderful way to get your point across. To talk about more about what is working, what kind of restorative justice things are working, and I like what you said about how they bring offenders and their victims together in a program that they have designed, that they're always willing to fund around the parameters that they have set. But I think what really is working is an organization like Nation Outside, which is a group of offenders formerly incarcerated, we won't say formerly incarcerated, formerly incarcerated citizens that they organize, mobilize, support formerly incarcerated and their families to advocate for political and social changes that will reduce incarceration, and to educate the community about the successes and contributions of the formerly incarcerated in order to enhance their capacity to thrive. And I have some more points, but this one point I really want to make is that I believe that there is a lot of value, a lot of different departments. The Community Mental Health Department instituted something called peer leadership, because they recognize the evidence-based value of having people who are a part of the system talk to other people who are receiving services in order because they can connect with them on a level that other people can't. So that same value is intrinsic in having formerly incarcerated individuals not only work with other incarcerated individuals, but we have a voice that needs to be heard, because a lot of times the funding and the voice is coming from the outside. It's wonderful to have people that want to help formerly incarcerated people, and we really appreciate that. But we have a lot to contribute, and we want to be able to contribute that. And one thing that I like about what Michigan Council on Crime and Delinquency has done is they have fostered this Nation Outside community. We have our director over here, Aaron Suganuma, and some other members. And it's really helping to be able to go. I went to Lansing to talk about this one specific thing, because I'm gonna try to narrow it down because I talk too long sometimes. But this one specific thing, which to me was very important. See, after I was formerly incarcerated, I went back into the prison as a prison volunteer for 15 years. However, after being a master prepared social worker at the University of Michigan, I couldn't apply for a job and get it because I was formerly incarcerated. So, which brings me to my point, which is this. People are sometimes very willing to hear from ex-offenders or formerly incarcerated people, but they're not willing to pay them. So what would really help is that if money went to places like Nation Outside so that they can hire people who are formerly incarcerated to be a part of the voice and the effort, because we have a lot to bring to the table. So that would be my point.
Amen, sister. The Shakespeare Behind Bars program is founded on the tenets of restorative justice. We work from the modus operandi of human excellence, which includes the following principles, values, and virtues: authenticity, commitment, compassion, camaraderie, confidentiality, courage, curiosity, dignity, empathy, forgiveness, honesty, hope, humility, inclusivity, integrity, intimacy, justice, kindness, unconditional love, mercy, nobility, open heart, open mind, redemption, respect, trust, and wisdom. SBB uses 4 deep human truths in its restorative circle of reconciliation. 1, human beings are social creatures who need community. Unless a human being has serious mental health challenges that lead them to isolation, they must have a tribe to which they belong. 2, human beings are narrative creatures who need story. Even with mental health challenges, a human being must have story and the tools to be able to speak it truthfully. 3, human beings can learn from their past if they are able to explore it through the process of reflection. Through the power of reflection, they come to understand who they were, who they are, and who they wish to become. 4, human beings must have meaning in their lives to live a fulfilling life. Without meaning, human beings lose hope and are reduced to despair. We place 4 questions at the center of our restorative circle of reconciliation. 1, who am I? 2, what do I love? 3, how will I live my life knowing I will die? 4, what is my gift to humankind? Shakespeare Behind Bars has a 6.1 recidivism rate over 23 years of its existence in Kentucky. And we don't pull the shenanigans that they do in states like Michigan. If you're out for a couple of years and you commit a crime and you're convicted and sent back to prison, hell no, that's not recidivism. That's a new crime. It's BS. In prisons where there are Shakespeare Behind Bars programs, the prisons have seen a reduction in its participating members receiving write-ups for violations or misbehavior. Additionally, in prisons where there are Shakespeare Behind Bars programs, the prisons have seen a reduction in violent offenses committed by prisoners on prisoners and prisoners on corrections officers.
Curt's a tough act to follow, isn't he? I feel like I forgot my homework. Restorative justice, in my mind, I think John did a nice job of stating the mechanics of it. It's a mediation, but it's really a chance to heal the process, to find what went wrong with an offender and a victim and heal that, not just punish the wrong. It recognizes the fact that people aren't just evil or good, but sometimes good people make mistakes. And that's what I like about the concept. I think it is growing in Michigan. You know, Grand Rapids has an organization, a restorative justice organization. And since that started several years ago, you're starting to hear it throughout the state. You're hearing it in Lansing as an alternative. So what was kind of, I think, 10 years ago considered kind of a crazy way out idea is gaining traction, and it recognizes that, as I said, people make mistakes, and we can heal. We can heal, and we can heal relationships, and offenders and victims don't have to be separate entities forever. They don't have to be kept apart. Oftentimes they may be family members or acquaintances, and healing that relationship is better than just punishing the wrong.
All right, thank you all so much. This question can, anybody who wants to start addressing it first, but if you could help us understand the economic impact. What is the economic impact of incarceration in the state, and what strategies might we take to reduce the cost of prisons?
I'll take a shot at that. The prison budget is one of the reasons why I started down this road back in 2008 as I was running for office, and then in 2009. The news was starting to pick up the fact that 20% of the general fund, general purpose budget was being spent on corrections. About 98% of that is Michigan money. There's very little coming from outside sources. And it's a $2 billion price tag. So that's the economics of it. We used to use the number $35,000 per year per prisoner. As our prison population is going down, that per prisoner cost is probably going up, but that's okay. There's a lot of fixed costs there, and you know, if you want your per prisoner cost to go down, you'd have more prisoners. So I like this problem we're having on the per prisoner cost. But what I hope is that as we close prisons and as we have fewer prisons, and really the only way to significantly adjust that budget is to close facilities and to have fewer employees. We have about 14,000 plus people that work for the Department of Corrections. I believe it's the largest of any department. I'm sure it is. So it's a significant cost, and that $2 billion is led by facilities and cost. The incremental cost per prisoner is insignificant. So when we parole 10 more people, it's not going to reduce the cost, but if we parole or keep out 1,000 people and we can close a facility, then long term it's going to have a significant cost. And we have to remember that we have to keep our eye on the ball. So when I hear colleagues or former colleagues say, well, we had a $2 billion price tag 8 years ago, now our prison population is lower, and we still have a $2 billion price tag. So somehow that's, we're not supposed to focus on corrections reform because it hasn't had an effect on the price tag of the budget. It has. Had we continued with 50,000 plus people in our prison system, we'd be at $2.5 billion or $3 billion. And the pension cost and the legacy cost of those employees and the facility cost would just continually escalate. It's going to take another decade of keeping our eye on the ball before we see that price tag drop. And when it happens, we need to incrementally put more money back into other parts of our budget, including things like programming and the arts, including more law enforcement, because I believe a better deterrent to crime is law enforcement than sentencing guidelines, and including education. And if we keep our focus on better spending the state budget that we can take from Corrections Department incrementally, long-term, our communities are going to be safer, we're going to have fewer people in prison, and we're going to have healthier communities.
Yeah, just to build on what Joe said, I mean, one aspect of the problem that we're seeing a lot is people with criminal records have a really hard time finding jobs. They have a really hard time finding housing. The unemployment rate for people on parole in Michigan is about 67%, and that's in a state which has about 4% unemployment. It's a huge barrier for people, and you know, it is hard to make it in society if you're unable to provide for yourself and your family. And this impact is broader than just people with criminal records. It's their families. 1 in 10 kids in Michigan has had a parent in prison. And those families, on average, make 22% less. So you see in communities where there's high rates of incarceration, you're seeing a cyclical impoverishment. And children who have had parents in prison are much more likely to drop out of school, have mental health issues, become homeless, and ultimately become justice involved themselves. So you're seeing multi-generational cycles of poverty, crime, and incarceration that are hollowing out some of our cities, and those need to be reversed to stop this multi-generational buildup of people in prison. Now, Michigan's population has gone down over the last number of years, and part of that is because intake has gone down. The crime rates are down, the commitment rates are down. You know, now less than 20% of felony dispositions in Michigan actually result in prison time now. I think that's progress. There's more options like mental health courts. More people are getting community supervision. But you know, the recidivism, intake, length of stay all need to go down to reduce the economic impacts we're seeing.
Can I follow up on John's? He said one word there that I can't believe I missed it, but the employment issue. You know, I credit Jennifer Granholm when she had 51,000 and change prisoners and she expedited the parole process. She released an additional 6,000 or 7,000 people in her term, and we did not see the recidivism rate go up. The problem she had is we were suffering from double-digit unemployment. Today, we have a great scenario where the prison system is starting to realize that we need to educate people inside. We're paroling more, and we have a talent shortage. And especially on my side of the state, Kent and Ottawa counties, we are starting to embrace people coming out of prison, saying, yes, we need employees so bad. I mean, I think Ottawa County says it's at about 3.5% unemployment. That's full employment. And the economics of this is the state will not be able to grow unless it also fixes its talent shortage. Now that's a broad issue. You've heard everybody talk about it. It has to do with education, recruiting people back to Michigan, you know, targeting people in the right fields and everything else, but it also has to do with what do we do with our reentry people. And if we can employ people coming out of prison, if we can find gainful employment of them, it not only helps them, it not only helps their families, but it helps Michigan, the Michigan economy grow. And if we want to look at it selfishly from the business perspective, so be it. I don't care why we do the right thing. If it's a selfish motive, let's do it for that reason. But this is a good time to focus on reentry issues and get people back to work.
So I'm a program guy, right? So I'm going to throw programs out there, right? It's programs that change human behavior. It's not punishment. And we all know that. There's plenty of studies that show that. So for the sake of argument, let's say 1/3 of the prison population have mental illness, 1/3 of the population have addiction issues, and about 1/3 of the population are criminals. What do? We dump them all in the same place. They perpetrate, they learn to be better criminals, right? The simplicity is, why not create specialty prisons that deal with mental illness and only have programs and prisoners there that are dealing with mental illness, right? Those that have addiction issues only are in prisons that have programs for addiction. And those that are criminal only have programs that are for criminals that will change the behavior, right? Our success rate would go up enormously and recidivism rate would drop. The reality is that, and we know this over and over again, programs change human behavior. Punishment and custody does not.
I wanted to mention that in its new funding stream, California Arts Council is now funding reentry programs for people who are released. And this is so important because people who have had the benefit of programs like Curt's, where they're getting a lot of arts training and learning how to reflect and empathize, and then they come home and what's there for them. So we need ways to support people in our communities so that they can continue their arts practice if they want to. We're not necessarily trying to create a new tribe of artists, but some people are very committed and talented, and that's what they want to do, and they need the support of their communities. And I think PCAP is involved with this. And it would be great to see the legislature, with the support of the Arts Council or with whomever, try to see how to build these programs so that they also can help people with housing, job training opportunities, but have a home base to go to where they know that people understand them and the programs that they've experienced so that they can continue with that sense of resource and support and community that cares about them.
Which would bring us to the point of additional funding for PCAP so it could hire some formerly incarcerated people. I'm just saying. When I was incarcerated, a very influential, bright, intelligent woman who was also incarcerated herself had to actually sue the state of Michigan so that we could get educational programs. One of my first college courses I took while incarcerated at Huron Valley Women's Facility, and it was called Psychology of the Abnormal, because I knew something had to be peculiar about me ending up in prison. I wanted to find out what it was, and that would be Mary Heinen, who works for PCAP now. You want to raise your hand, Mary? And now I understand that some of those educational programs have dried up. But again, I say, all the help that we want to give to people when they come out, if we could give them some money, a job, then maybe they can go, you know. Let me just be real with you for a minute. I'm still on my best behavior, but I'm gonna just be real. I'm not gonna be, I don't care if I sing like Beyonce. If I don't have a place to live and a job and no food, and I can't provide for myself, I'm not going to an art class. I don't have time to think about it. That's very low down on my list. Now, I like the idea about having, if we gotta have prisons at all, having different ones, you know, but yeah, that's another level of thinking right there. But you know, I'm with you on that, you know. And, but there has to be a way that we give people jobs when they come out. They have to get jobs. They have to get paid so they can survive and live, and then we can think about all this other programming. Okay, so I'm just saying.
I already see a jumping off point for some table conversations here, which is really great. No, this is good. This is good. You know, and to bring the conversation, you know, to the place of we're here, right, for art, for justice. You know, talking about arts organizations. If maybe we'll start with Curt on this one. He started us down the line of thinking on this on our last question. But how are arts programs with a focus on criminal justice funded? I think there's a lot of people here in the audience who'd like to know that. And how might we think about evaluating criminal justice arts programming here in Michigan?
So for the first question, Shakespeare Behind Bars receives no funding from the state of Michigan. SBB is a 501c3 not-for-profit corporation that raises all of its funds through donations in a fundraising efforts, which means if I don't raise the money, I don't get paid, but I still show up. That's the point, showing up. How might we think about evaluating programs? Performing arts have become a growing worldwide presence in prisons over the past 30 years. Increasing numbers of theater, music, dance, spoken word, poetry, opera, and film programs are being facilitated in both male and female prisons in diverse, secure settings. They attract significant academic and media attention. Organizational reports, documentary films, journalism, theoretical and applied research have been detailing prison arts, creating recognition that this body of work is becoming an increasingly valued part of the correctional enterprise. There already exist multiple academic research and evaluation studies that have proven incarcerated participants look forward to arts programs more than any other mandatory program. Through arts programs, participants note this: creation of a safe haven to explore what it means to be a human being, 88% improvement in the ability to express emotions, 90% reduction in institutional misconduct, increased human and social capital, meaning social living, learning, increased cohesion amongst prisoners, bridging racial divide, improved relationships between prisoners and correctional staff, improved connection to their families, increased participation in other rehabilitative programs. Due to the extraordinary success of arts in corrections programs, the Michigan Department of Corrections should consider giving arts programs a higher status value than the current status of, quote, a leisure time activity. It's a miserable name, because what does it connote to the officers? Lazy, right? Right? That's how they label us. This higher status would create more respect among correctional staff. For those of us that work in prisons over a long period of time, we do build relationships with correctional officers all the way up through the ranks. We do, right? There are those that see the difference in the work that we're doing because the prisoners are different, and they get to see them during their 8-hour shift, and they got 3 8-hour shifts, right? So of course they behave in our programs, but what they get to see is when they go back to the yard, it changes the environment of the prisoners, and it changes the correctional environment and makes prisons safer both for the prisoners and the correctional officers.
I just have a couple small points to add. The Correctional Education Association, which is a national organization, has meetings about training for people who are inside in order to prepare them for careers outside. This is a growing sector, actually. So we asked to present on the arts, and at their Region 7 meeting in Sacramento back in October. And what we realized through our evaluation work is that often the arts programs are a gateway to an interest in other learning. People gain confidence in themselves, and in addition to all the other wonderful qualities that Curt mentioned, they take that into other interests in education, in learning how to read. There is a high level of illiteracy among folks who are incarcerated. Many of them did not complete school, and so they become interested in education. So we call this the gateway to education, and we are encouraging our county jails to also support arts programs in California. We're doing a multi-year study which is funded by the National Endowment for the Arts. You can read our revised edition. It's on our website, calawyersforthearts.org, under our advocacy page. And the reason I mention that is because we have a very simple questionnaire that we provide to people who, at the completion of the art classes, asking them how they thought their behavior and attitudes had changed. And the results are really phenomenal. It's very much mirrors what Curt was just saying in terms of attitude, behavior, getting along with other people inside and with staff. And so it's a great way of preparing people. Often I go and see programs and I will ask people, do you think you would be here if you had had this kind of training when you were in school? And the answer almost always is thoughtful. And they say, no, maybe I wouldn't have been here because my behavior would have been different. I would have been more interested in finishing school and learning something about myself and going forward with a purpose. So my new mantra for the legislature in California, at least, is if we had more arts education in schools, we wouldn't have so many people to correct.
Well, I'm glad Alma finished on that note because I may be a little bit of a Debbie Downer on this. There's 110 legislators. There's 38 senators. I would pay money if I could find somebody who ever got a phone call from a constituent that said, we need to spend more tax money on arts in the prisons. It just doesn't happen. When you hit a pothole, or you pay your auto insurance bill, or all the other things, thousands of things that you go through life, arts in prisons, unless you have a loved one in there, is not going to be a priority. This is where an omnibus budget is helpful to you, because you have to find those few key legislators that are paying attention to this and convince them of what we're talking about up here, and then make it practical as to what Alma just did, of how does it pertain to me back at home in terms of a safer community, in terms of a lower budget where we can spend money somewhere else, but it's a little bit of a stretch, and you've got to be able to connect the dots for those legislators that are serving on the corrections budget or in criminal justice that are paying attention to this issue, because there's not many of them. And you better start with the freshman class, because they're going to be gone in 6 years, and you're going to have to start with a whole new group. So that's the political reality of it, is this is not a hot burning issue for 9.9 million people. So if we can figure out how to connect the dots and make it practical for people in turn, and how it means for a safer community for them, they will start paying attention.
You remind me, Joe, that we started our advocacy in 2011 at a hearing at the Budget Committee of the Assembly, which is our lower house in California, the Public Safety Committee Budget Subcommittee. And that's where we started talking about this. And they had at that point a $400 million budget allocation for rehabilitation. And I said, why don't you spend 1% of that for the arts? Just $4 million. I was just talking pie in the sky, and voila, years later, here we are with $8 million a year for arts programs in prisons, because they saw the results. They saw that it helps with rehabilitation as people are preparing to be released. It helps reduce recidivism, and the numbers are important. So it's great to do some simple surveys if you're involved in these kinds of programs, to keep getting the evidence in front of them.
Yeah, just to underscore what's been said here already, there is an advocacy opportunity with the department and with legislators for arts programming, but it needs to be supported by data and arguments that it's going to make our communities safer, it's going to support rehabilitation. And the other thing is that I don't think the department sees the arts as jobs. And you know, if they did, I think they would support public money for, you know, arts jobs training, that sort of thing. It just, I don't think anyone from the department's here, but my sense about it is that they're just seeing arts as leisure and not as part of the rehabilitation process or part of reentry.
So it's all about language, isn't it, right? What Joe says is exactly right. Joe is because he's such an advocate and he understands how to talk to other legislators, he has to lead the way to connect, right? When I talk to legislators, I don't talk about the arts, I talk about what the success is, and the success is recidivism. 84% of the prisoners that have been released in Kentucky over the past 23 years have not gone back to prison. None of them work in the arts, but the arts prepared them to be human beings and to take jobs and to work collaboratively, right? It's not about getting a job in the arts, it's all about the language. It's the gateway to education that leads them into working, but it gives them all of the soft skills that they need to be successful. So when I talk to wardens, I don't talk about recidivism rate because that's about jobs. We got to keep the recidivism rate high because I got people I'm employing, right? What I talk to them about? A reduction in violence on the yard, a safer prison. When I started at Brooks years ago, average incident of violence per month was 25 to 30 events. Within the whole collective of prison, it was in the 50 to 60% or times. Over a year later, we reduced violence on the yard to below double digits, and it stayed there. So whenever violence went above double digits, the warden would sit down with me and say, "What's going on?" And I knew what was going on. Why? Because the guys in my circle knew the yard. And I just said, "What's going on? Where's the conflict?" And they would tell me, and I would give that information to the warden, right? So it isn't that we're trying to get jobs in the arts. We've got to change that language. I got 3 kids. I don't want them to be in the arts. I'm in the arts, right? I'm not encouraging them to go in the arts, but they all take arts and they all work. My 2 kids are working in the corporate sector and are very successful. Why? They would tell you, because I took arts programming that changed my way of thinking and gave me the soft skills I need to get a job and keep it.
Yeah, and and as talking about a gateway, I think it's important too, if you want to take the information that you are learning today in this conversation, you want to take it to actively advocating at the legislature. We are, as an organization, Creative Many Michigan, we are hosting a statewide Arts Advocacy Day on Wednesday, April the 18th, with a group of individuals who understand the importance of the arts, who are working actively with artists and creative practitioners, with our colleagues at the Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs, with others who believe in the power of the arts. And so if those of you who want to join us for that day to take your voice out there, we will schedule your meeting with your lawmaker for you. So please join us for that. And as we kind of move to the table conversation, I think that one of the things we want to talk about are what are some of those activating things. If we're going to go talk to a lawmaker, if we're going to raise our voice and advocate, what are some current pieces of legislation that are passed or soon to be considered in Michigan, and how will these pieces of legislation impact our state?
Sarah, before we break up, is it possible to ask John to just list the current legislative proposals that are that are pending, that are on your menu?
Sure, I'm happy to. So it's budget season, for one thing, so there are some advocacy opportunities there. We've got a couple parole bills we like. One is parole for medically frail prisoners. Right now in Michigan, due to something called truth in sentencing, you cannot be paroled until you've reached your minimum sentence, and as a result, Michigan runs a nursing home inside prisons. It does chemotherapy, it does dialysis, and this is inhumane in addition to very expensive, because treatments could be provided at, through Medicaid if folks were paroled, and it's not. So that bill is passed the House, it's in the Senate. It's not as sweeping as we'd like it to be, but it's better than nothing. We've got a parole bill for low-risk offenders that we're supporting in the Law and Justice Committee. There's a number of bills around removing barriers to success upon reentry. The licensing system in the state keeps a lot of people unemployed, out of work. We've got some specific bills related to the healthcare industry, which also has very restrictive rules. 10 years within any felony conviction, you're banned from working at a hospital in Michigan. There's Raise the Age. MCCD is here, Jason, and obviously, and Jason is the lead on the Raise the Age program. It's 17-year-olds are treated as adults for purposes of criminal responsibility in Michigan. It's one of only 5 states where that's the case. Jason is working to end that. And then there should be a bail reform package coming out. It's not moving on the timeline we'd like, but my old boss, Representative LeGrand, has a package of 9 bills that he hopes to introduce this spring. So those are all good opportunities to reduce intake, length of stay, reduce barriers to success upon reentry.
All right. Okay. So I just wanted to mention that there is a town hall that will be on the 9th, next Monday. If you're in Washtenaw County and you're interested in reentry services that happen here for people, there is a flyer on the table.
And Hazelette is going to perform tonight at our reception. We're really looking forward to that, the closing reception of the PCAP show. Thank you.
All right, we have a few minutes left. Are there any final comments or thoughts or things we haven't talked about, questions that you were hoping to be able to respond to but hadn't? Final thoughts.
There's one thing I kind of passed by, but Curt reminded me. One area of advocacy I think we should focus on, and if I get back to the Senate, I'm going to try to do this. In the House, I reached out to the department management, the leadership of the department. I reached out to the advocates that are in this room and many others, the prisoners. I spent a lot of time with prisoners. And I kind of forgot about the corrections officers. And that was a mistake. And I think part of the advocacy can be the programming that we're talking about. Curt touched on it. Incidents of violence go down. And one of the selling tools I think we have for this programming is if you want a safer work environment, you would encourage this. And we have to partner with the officers. I know there are, with 14,000 people in the department, you're never going to have a consensus. But I intend to reach out to the union, reach out to the officers themselves, and say, how do we work on this together? How do we create a safe environment for you? And try to extract some of the reform-mindedness that we need in our prison system.
I just wanted to say that I think as artists, I would encourage you to think about how you can support narrative change around criminal justice issues. Obviously art is a way of communicating with people, and right now, the politics around criminal justice are very punitive, very tough on crime, and we need to tell stories of second chances and tell stories about the way the system is not working. And I think artists could help with that. So think about it.
Well, I just wanted to mention that this is the first of a series of Art for Justice forums that's going to take place in several states. We have some women here from Georgia. Where are you? Right, we're going to be doing, thanks for coming up here. We're going to be doing a program at Emory University, one in Columbia University. Anybody here from New York? and Houston, Texas, Sacramento, California, and Auburn, Alabama. There's a schedule on your acknowledgments page. If you know people in these states, please let them know about this. And we want to build a national momentum towards reduction of incarceration. The goal of the National Art for Justice Fund is to reduce incarceration in selected states that have large numbers of people incarcerated by 20% over the next 5 years. So that's quite a charge, and we can think about how to do that, but I really like what you said about changing the narrative, changing the language. We use the word returned citizens. We talk about people who are in prison instead of incarcerated, and we help define our purpose by helping them redefine theirs. We're all in this leaky boat together. And we really need to all be focused on building greater nationhood for our country. So we can't let these folks fall behind. They're part of us, they're part of our families, and we need to be including them.
Oh, so this is mandatory? You know what?
Mandatory programming.
Mandatory programming, yeah. You know what? But anyway, Alma, you know, when you said that arts in the schools, I remember I was in high school and I knew two things I wanted to be. I wanted to be a musician, and I wanted to be a social worker. And I remember going to, well, actually it was in junior high school, and I remember sitting in there with my junior high school counselor and telling them those two things, and them telling me, well, African-American female social workers are a dime a dozen, so you should take computer programming. And music is not a real job. So what am I today? I'm a singing social worker. I knew that in junior high school. And I only can think about what would have happened if somebody would have developed that talent in me at that point. So I definitely do agree with that. But mandatory anything when you're already in prison, yeah, that's a disincentive, I'm just saying.
I just want to say, look around. This is our tribe. I'm thankful for Alma, the caller of the circle, for Joe Voss, the creative many, and PCAP. We've convened the tribe. Make sure you leave this having connected with people in this room, because you showed up for a reason and you're not alone. And the only way to make anything happen is for us to create a group, a tribe that is focused on the specialties that we do within the tribe and how they support each other, right? That's really, really important. And I'm thankful to be a part of this and to be with you and to meet you and to advocate for arts for jobs.
You know, I just want to say that John's comment that our correction system is very punitive, and it is, but oftentimes, and I had a comment before we started too, a gentleman made a comment that we have to remember how far we've come. From where we were 10 years ago, when I started paying attention to this issue, and I never even paid attention to it until 2008. And this room would probably have half as many people in. We have over 10,000 fewer prisoners than we did in Michigan. Nationally, people are starting to wake up. Now, we've got a little blip in the system. Our Attorney General at the federal level isn't my, you know, I'm not a big fan. I'm not a fan of our state Attorney General either. So we've got some issues. But as Curt heard me say once, you know, there's some dinosaurs around, but we all know what happens to them. We have the momentum, and we're heading in the right direction. So we can't be all doom and gloom, because we've made progress. So we just got to keep it up.
Pray for a comet to take those dinosaurs out.
All right, well, thank you everybody for the conversation today. This is really, yeah, a round of applause for our panelists. You know, these are really powerful ideas to take us into our next conversation. And I think that it's important to understand that when we are talking about advocacy, that advocacy is not done in a silo, right? That we need everybody involved in this conversation. And as we're here today, I hope that you'll carry on into your table conversation that we are here to talk about the intersection of art and social justice, to make sure that there are people that they're ready and poised and ready for this conversation. There's a group of lawmakers already right now, a bipartisan group of lawmakers called the Michigan Legislative Creative Caucus. So lawmakers who are more than 35 right now who are ready to engage and have been engaging on issues related to the creative sector. So poised with a lot of the connections you guys are talking about. People are ready and excited for this conversation. And this is all about what we do as a next step together. So thank you guys so much for being here today.